Hello, thank you, Rodolfo. Um, I'm going to read my speech. I kind of tend to just wander off, as these guys learned the other day when I was taking a photo of some cachayuyo or something, and they didn't notice I was gone, and they left me on the beach in Valdivia, and I had to like hike for, 10 kilometers until they realized I wasn't in the van. So, thank you. Yeah,
I'm sorry.
it doesn't make it better. Okay, so when I was about 18 or 19, I lived for a year in a remote corner of the southeast of Ohio. That's the state where I'm from. It's kind of in between New York and Chicago. It's the Midwest. It's a part of the state where there are mountains and the native forest was never cut down. It's kind of the rest of the state. You can go back to the last photo, actually. The rest of the state's kind of all farmland, but it's farmland, mostly it's corn. Corn that's not even for consumption, it's just to feed animals or it's an additive in other products. But this part of the state, it's very far from the cities, very far from highways. Not a lot of people live there. But there's a fruit called the pawpaw. It's a relative of the papaya. This is the pawpaw. I think it grows throughout kind of eastern United States and also parts of Central America. It has this amazing kind of tropical flavor that seems like it shouldn't be there. It's this incredible fruit that no one knows, no one uses for anything anymore. It doesn't. It's like a cross between a banana and a mango. It's very nutritious. No one knows about it anymore. It used to be eaten all the time by kind of Native Americans and early settlers, but when everyone started going to supermarkets, they kind of forgot about going into the forest, so they forgot about the pawpaw. It just sat there on trees, grew wild, and died. No one ate it. But in the last few years, the pawpaws started to be rediscovered by culinary community in Ohio and other parts of the eastern U.S. It's not that it's on supermarket shelves or anything. It's at farmers markets and it's at restaurants when it's in season. There are people brewing beer with the pawpaw. There's pawpaw festivals. You can do the next photo. So everyone's suddenly very proud of this native species that was always there, just no one paid any attention to whatsoever. And it's incredible. Not yet. Commercially, it's still not very successful. It only survives a few days in a truck, and it's still primarily grown wild. However, because so many more people are interested in the pawpaw now, the culinary community has rallied around it. There are people looking into ways to process the pulp and open up new opportunities with the pawpaw. So this kind of has had me thinking the last few years about remote places and kind of the value they still have to the culinary world. And I've been traveling to kind of a lot of other remote places in the last few years, and it wasn't really intentional to visit them because they were remote. It's just cool shit kind of tends to happen there in gastronomy right now. And I've noticed a pattern going on that's kind of happening everywhere. That's happening in places like the Faroe Islands, like here, and including Chile. So here are a few examples of these remote places. The Faroe Islands is this tiny archipelago between Norway and Iceland. There's just 50,000 people. It's kind of like if you had Chiloé, but it was in the place where Isla de Pascua was. It's very remote. Not a lot of people go there. It's very clean and pristine. There's a lot of very unique ingredients, though. There's, you can go to the next photo. There are mahogany clams, these clams that they can live for hundreds of years. They have this incredible flavor. It's the most interesting clam I've ever tasted, but they really don't leave the Faroe Islands, and no one there even uses them. There's a great restaurant in Tórshavn. It's the capital of the Faroe Islands. It's called Cox. They harvest just a few at a time and serve them in tiny amounts. Um, Next photo, there's really nice sea urchins too, Arizo. Um, what else? You can go to the next one. But the main reason I went there was, next photo, was to write about the langoustine. The langoustine there, they're very special because they're very large. It's the size of a lobster. Some of them are, like an arm. They're huge. And they have a great flavor. You can eat them just raw, right out of the water. Break one open. It's amazing. But they weren't used until a few years ago. Fishermen in the Faroe Islands concentrate on fishing for export, so mass quantities of cod and other fish are traditionally what's more important for the economy there. And next photo. So one local chef there, he figured out a way to transport them. It's like little hotels for or something for langoustines. So they can transport them alive to other parts of the region. There's not many people there. There's not enough to kind of make them commercial in the Faroe Islands. But so the chef sent them to René Redzepi and other chefs around Nordic countries, and very suddenly a very small Faroese langoustine industry developed. And now they're on the Instagram feed of every chef in the region, and kind of they're popular now. It's they're not going to be cod or anything, but suddenly a few hundred people have jobs just harvesting, working with the langoustines sustainably, by the way. Next photo. So Iceland is another country I've been going to quite a bit lately. Like the Faroe Islands, it's kind of an isolated island in the North Atlantic. It was very poor until a few generations ago. The fishing industry became industrialized in the 1940s. The country became very wealthy and suddenly it was developed very rapidly. The people began losing their old traditions, and they began buying products from Denmark and Europe. They started to forget about the things they had around them. And then in 2008, the currency collapsed and the country went bankrupt. So for a few years at least, everyone was poor again. They couldn't buy products from Denmark or around Scandinavia, and just kind of had to deal with what they had around, which for so many years they thought was nothing special. It was whatever. It was bland local food that no one cared about anymore. So my friend Gunnar Carl Gislason, he opened a restaurant in Reykjavik called Gill, like right after the collapse. It was probably the worst timing to ever open a fine dining restaurant that you could imagine. But he was expecting to open a restaurant using products from Denmark and other parts of the region, foie gras from France, whatever. And then suddenly he was, oh shit, what do I do now? So he started traveling around Iceland to see what was there. And everywhere he went, he found these amazing things that no one was taking notice of anymore. That's Gunnar, by the way. Go back. They're collecting seagull eggs on the side of the cliff. Okay, so one product he found, one person he encountered in a place called Stickish in the northwest was a guy named Simon. Simon was drunk one night and bought an island, as people do, I guess. And around that island, he started harvesting blue mussels, these incredible mussels with a blue shell that are local to those waters. His problem was that no one really ate those mussels anymore. They didn't even know what to do with them. The chefs, the families, it was, decades since anyone, would be served a plate like this at a restaurant. So Gunnar began serving them at his restaurant. Then other chefs began using the mussels. Soon the mussels were on TV and in magazines. They gradually began people started eating them in their houses. And recipes developed, old ancestral recipes were rediscovered. And kind of there's a pattern happening here between the pharaohs. Iceland. So it wasn't just mussels. Gunnar found lots of other things, and the same thing happened. There was barley, which was kind of a staple of traditional ancestral Icelandic food, but it wasn't being grown in Iceland anymore until one farmer started planting it. Then Gunnar started serving it, and then other chefs started taking an interest, and it became, a trend sort of, and people were using it again. And then all of these other things, but one product that really caught my attention was algae. There's a biologist named Io. He's also a Zen Buddhist. That's his hand. He was at a monastery in California once, and he noticed how much seaweed was being used in the food there. It was, it was a monastery, Zen monastery, so Japanese style foods, broths, and he started to think, we have so much seaweed in Iceland, but no one does anything with it. It's everywhere, and there's not a lot of plants that grow. So what about seaweed? So he did some research, and he learned that Icelanders, before the country developed, were eating all kinds of seaweeds. It was rich in everything the island's diet lacked. There were iron, dietary and soluble fiber, protein, iodine, potassium. It went into breads and into stews, or it was dried and burned, and they use it as salt, kind of just ground up dried seaweed, and it had this salty flavor, and it's beautiful. Or it was just dried and even eaten straight. He started harvesting dulse and other algae, and Io started harvesting dulse and other algae and selling them. Gunnar made a dashi with some of the dulse, and other chefs became interested. People throughout the region kind of looked to this one guy in Iceland, this simple kind of 60-something-year-old man, a Buddhist, to this kind of the algae guru, I guess. And a Norwegian man came there hoping to learn how, he did everything. He was taking notes about the temperatures and asking very technical questions, and Io didn't really know anything about it. He just did everything simply. He just meditates and thinks about algae and figures out ways to do things with it, and it's just a very good, simple product. And after the Norwegian came, he started visiting monasteries in Thailand, hoping to cash in on that. Now Io sells dulce de noma, and he's figured out ways to make a kind of a soy sauce from algae, kind of like Rodolfo does with the broth he has at his restaurant. But so he sells this kind of soy sauce to sushi restaurants mostly in Iceland. You can go to the next. So the Amazon, I go there quite a bit actually, and more than normal people, I guess, which, assuming I'm normal. Very isolated region, as everyone knows, but it has such tremendous biodiversity. It's the origin of many of the world's most important plant products, like rubber or cacao, though because of the infrastructure and the difficulties of the terrain, those products are more successful commercially in other places. Many remote places like the Amazon have very fragile ecosystems, so if the people that live there do not find sustainable ways to earn an income, they usually do something destructive. So when Amazonian products are able to find commercial success in a sustainable way, it's really important. It's a beautiful thing. And in November, I went on a small expedition in the Peruvian Amazon to explore with a bunch of chefs and conservationists. We went to a Bora village called Pucauquillo, which is known for making this kind of fermented yuca reduction. It's kind of like it's called ají negro. It's kind of like an Amazonian mole. There's kind of all kinds of other spices in it. You can go to the next photo. There's ants and hormigas and all kinds of spices and chiles and all kinds of things. It's beautiful, very complex flavor that they kind of used to with everything in stews or whatever, or put it on fish and kind of grow with it. Every village in that area has a different recipe, but essentially they've been working with it for centuries, but it's never really had a commercial value. It's just this amazing product that exists in these villages, and no one else in Peru has ever really even heard about it. So, a chef in Lima, Pedro Miguel Schiaffino, was introduced to them. They kind of were hoping to bring tourists to their village, kind of to earn income rather than chop down the forest or anything like that, or doing destructive things. So, but tourists, it's very far from Iquitos. It's in the complete opposite direction of kind of where tourists go there to look for wildlife. So Pedro Miguel kind of tried this ají negro. He found it incredible, and he started serving it at he has 2 restaurants in Lima, Amaz and Malabar, plus this kind of luxury cruise boats, and they source the ají negro from there, and it's been able to completely transform this economy of this village. You can go to the next photo. And that's they're kind of processing the fermented yuca, extracting the liquid. Next photo. This is paiche. It's kind of a prehistoric fish in Peru. It's the largest fish in the Amazon. It can weigh 200 kilos. It kind of has a totally different physical structure than any other fish. You can't, like in the kitchen, you can't debone it like you would a grouper or a corvina. When you pass the knife under the scales, there's just like this big, thick bone, so you can't really break it down. Like it just splits the fish in two, so you have to kind of just work around it. It's very odd. But it has a very firm texture and a flavor of like kind of an ocean fish, kind of like a black cod, and it doesn't really seem like a river fish at all when you taste it. It breathes air, so it has to come up to the surface every once in a while, which makes it very easy to hunt. And for that reason, it's kind of being hunted to extinction in many parts of the region. But suddenly there's a recovery going on because it lives in these shallow oxbow lakes, which makes it very easy to farm raise them. So a company in Tarapoto, in the Peruvian Amazon, has been using chefs in the media to kind of promote their farm-raised paiche, and now they export the frozen fillets all around the world. And it's like I can find it at Whole Foods in New York. There's paiche alongside salmon. And when this happened, in the last few years, the demand for wild paiche decreased, and these fishing communities, which kind of were hunting them to nothing, the wild paiche lost its value, and they kind of stopped selling it. So suddenly, and NGOs kind of taught them to kind of manage their fisheries, and the populations have begun to recover. So they can hunt them again. But what they found that's particularly interesting is that the paiche, which is a predator of smaller fish, the more paiche there are, the more other fish there are too. So they can also harvest the other fish and sell those as well. So it's kind of, they're just from this one fish, the entire ecosystem has become available again. So anyway, there's a pattern here. All of these remote places are making this contribution to the gastronomy of tomorrow. I think what I'm describing is not something overly complicated. It's very practical. There are amazing foods kind of on the edges of the maps, and most people just have forgotten about them, and there are simple ways to give value to them again. And chefs, the media, public, they're hungry for these kinds of things. Everyone just wants to get their hands on them, but it takes time, but it's happening kind of everywhere. Everyone is starting to pay attention to these products, from these amazing products from remote places. And the culinary community has more power than it ever has. Chefs, writers, scientists, farmers, fishermen, and people just going out to restaurants and making choices of where to eat and what dishes they order. And the demand is kind of shifting, and mostly in a sustainable way. It's not just harvesting the wildlife. These are sustainable products for the most part. Um, they might not have the quantitative value as, say, like Chilean salmon or blueberries, but they often have more unique flavors, and they're a higher expression of the land or the seas they came from. And this is happening everywhere, especially in places like Chile. And more than any of the places I just mentioned, Chile has a better infrastructure and a better culinary community. It's stronger every time I'm here, and it's an incredible time to be here. And thanks for having me.